On May 11th, 2004, a massive corporate merger was finalized between General Electric's NBC, the network of The Tonight Show, Seinfeld, Cheers, ER, and Law & Order, and Vivendi Universal Entertainment, the movie studio and production company responsible for such hits as Jaws, Back to the Future, and Jurassic Park. Looking back on it now, the combination of these two entities, an early example of such entertainment mergers, could be seen as a harbinger of things to come, as in the years since, similar corporate-led mergers and consolidations of TV and movie production companies and studios have become more and more commonplace. This has been good news for many shareholders and CEOs, but has typically been seen as less positive for the thousands of employees who have lost jobs due to the mergers, and for both artists and fans of media, who see these mergers as the shrinking of a once larger entertainment landscape. That said, even if the NBC-Universal merger might have been an early strike in an unfortunate battle, at least one good thing did quickly come of it, as the very next night after the merger was announced, Conan O'Brien, at the time host of NBC's Late Night with Conan O'Brien, announced the merger and then introduced a new comedy bit taking advantage of his show's new corporate structure. That night, Conan informed the audience that now that his show was owned by both NBC and Universal, he was free to show clips of shows produced and owned by Universal whenever he wanted, a notion he immediately displayed by debuting the Walker Texas Ranger lever, a red and yellow lever positioned behind his desk that, when pulled, would play a random clip from the Chuck Norris starring show Walker, Texas Ranger. The series, starring Norris as a virtuous, spiritual, half-Cherokee, half-white law officer, had at the time just recently completed a 9-season, 203-episode run on CBS, and was now running consistently in cable reruns. Despite having a dedicated audience of older demographic viewers, as was the case with most CBS shows, it was likely Conan's younger-skewing, more irony-loving audience was less familiar with the show, which the Walker Texas Ranger lever skits took full advantage of. The skit, which would quickly become a recurring audience favorite, was almost always the same. Conan insisting that evening's show was too busy to keep pulling the lever, yet nevertheless finding himself powerless to continuously do so, treating both himself and the audience to short, out-of-context, and increasingly bizarre clips from the series. Whether it was Walker covered in scorpions or punching a man already stuck in a bear trap, an abusive father tricking his young son into jumping from a ladder and falling to the ground, a marriage ceremony interrupted by gunfire, or, in one of the bit's most infamous moments, guest star Haley Joel Osment informing Walker of a tragic medical diagnosis, the lever was played as the ultimate game of chance, offering up clips that could be either shocking, cartoonishly violent, or ridiculously maudlin. But no matter what, the unexpected outlandishness of the clips, and Conan's bemused reaction to them, was always hilarious. Arguably, the segment, which would remain the staple of Late Night for the rest of Conan's tenure with the show, brought a new audience to Walker. And even if they enjoyed the series on a more campy, ironic level, their fandom was probably still welcomed by those involved with the show, including the leading man. Which would help explain why Chuck Norris himself showed up on Late Night for a particularly memorable Walker Texas Ranger lever skit in 2004, pulling a lever of his own which showed a clip of him beating up O'Brien. It was, at the time, a rare moment of self-parody from Norris, who had been dinged by many in the media up until that point as perhaps too self-serious, a reputation that would further change in the following years as Norris embraced the sudden viral sensation of Chuck Norris jokes that began dominating the internet and led to several books. But if the internet had already been a thing in the mid-'80s, it's likely Norris would have been a viral sensation even earlier, with a movie that ultimately would later go on to become an ironic cult classic for so bad it's good movie fans online, even as it was also embraced by many genuine action fans. So who says Norris doesn't have range? The year is 1985, and Cannon Films are ready to release a film meant to broaden the action genre appeal of its iconic leading man, and in the process hopefully launch the next big action franchise with Invasion U.S.A. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. But before we introduce our guest proper, I just want to say to you, Bryan, Trev was easy. Now it's your turn. One night, you're going to close your eyes, and when you open, I'll be there. And it's time to die.
Wow! Right off the bat, telling our guest he's going to die. That's a
Well,
that's
yeah.
that's the quality that we like to bring to the show. That's why
We're
we don't have very many guests.
Well, we are coming off of a very sad day for Canada, the Olympic loss. So honestly, I don't give a shit.
Well, also a sad day for America because yes, we won the hockey game, but then we found out that all our players are pieces of shit who celebrated with Kash Patel and Donald Trump. So
That's true.
Know,
It did make me feel better. I will say that.
Yeah. Surprisingly enough, men's sports not a bastion of like liberalism and good natured. Anyways, whatever. We can't get into this. We have too much to talk about this.
We
time.
have a patriotic film to get to.
We do actually, yes. I'm going to go right back to feeling proud to be an American as we talk about today's film, which is not only a new film for us, but a brand new series. We survived the girls with the failed February franchises, and we are heading into a very exciting 2-month franchise, and that is the Misfired Cannons franchise. 2 months dedicated to failed franchise starters from Cannon Films. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry, we'll talk all about it in just a second. But to do so, I thought it was really important, especially in this first episode, where we're like, breaking off the Cannon stick here, to bring in someone who I've known for a long time, and I just thought would be the perfect person to talk about this movie, this type of movie, this star, and just this kind of all this action oeuvre. And that is our special guest, Bryan Kristopowitz. Bryan, let me just quickly introduce you here and give our kind of background. Bryan is a writer for the movies section of 411 Mania, which I also used to write for. And that's how Bryan and I met each other, or, digitally met each other years and years ago.
Yeah.
And Bryan is kind of I'll let him explain it all in a moment. Bryan is, to me, an expert in kind of B-movie cinema and action movies. And importantly for our conversation, he has recently published a book called Not Coming to a Theater Near You, 50 Great Direct-to-Video Action Flicks of the Early 2000s. So, Bryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Bryan Kristopowitz. Thank you for having me. You introduced me well enough. I've been writing for 411 Mania since 2005. Okay. That's going to be 21 years this year.
Wow.
If they don't fire me. I mostly focus on B movies, indie cinema, like real indie cinema, not necessarily A24 hip and edgy stuff, like genre stuff, action, horror, science fiction, that kind of thing. It's what I love. I've written a book about it, or focused. I've written a book about stuff like that. So obviously I love it.
What was the book title again? Did Trev say your book title already?
Not Coming to a Theater Near You.
Right. Okay, good.
50 Great Direct-to-Video Action Flicks of the Early 2000s.
Cool.
Published by Bear Manor Media, a real publishing house.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No, I got the book off of Amazon, so it's a real book. It's out
Great.
there, and
I can't read, Bryan. Do you have a pop-up version? Do you have a video essay version? And
No, not yet.
okay,
Maybe one day.
okay.
Oh man, if there was like an audiobook version, Bryan, who would you want to read it?
That's a good question.
There's a lot of great B-movie stars with great voices, right? Probably one of them, right?
I would probably try to get someone like that. Someone who would be
Judging from
willing
this
to do it.
performance, not a Chuck Norris.
Well, I don't know. I don't think Chuck would. I don't think Chuck's in my price range.
I said, I used to write for 411, so obviously I did not stick around as long as Bryan has, but I was there for a bit, and I just want to take this moment because this is my first time actually talking to Bryan in person. We've interacted a lot online over the years, but I just want to really thank Bryan in person because when I was there, first of all, he was always one of the most entertaining writers on the site, which is still the case. I wouldn't say I always agreed with his takes, but that was not the point, right? It was always interesting to read his takes. But for my last few years at 411 Mania, I took over a column called the 411 Mania Movies Top 5, where every week I had to think of a new top 5 topic, and I would post it for all of the 411 writers to kind of share their personal top 5s in that column. And this was not a paid gig. We were all doing it for the love of the game. We were all just doing it because we were movie fans, and everybody had other jobs and everybody had lives. And so there was many weeks where the other writers were not, didn't have the time to submit a list. And the entire time I did that column, which I think was about 3 or 4 years, the only author or only writer on the site who never missed a single week and always gave me a list was Bryan. And there were certain weeks where it was just my list and Bryan's list, and I always appreciated that I was never I never had to scrap one because I always knew I would at least get a list from Bryan. So, and every week Bryan was just contributing so much to the site in general. So I just want to personally thank you for that, because you saved my hide a lot when the other guys were too busy. But I always really thought that was just so classy and great of you to always contribute something.
No, you're welcome. The thing is, I loved doing that. That was always fun. It was always something to look forward to. What were you gonna, what was that week's topic, and then I'd have to figure out what to put. It wasn't always easy, but it was fun.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the reason we brought Bryan to this episode is because we said, as you just mentioned, he's his column. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your primary column at 411, actually, because I think that'd be a good segue into it. Yeah.
Well, the gratuitous B-movie column is what I guess I'm most known for at 411 Mania. It's a column that I started in 2008. It was actually the second column that I started. The first one I did was like this. It was called What This Column, and it was sort of a stream of conscious essay type thing. Every week I would talk about TV and I would talk about movies. I didn't start writing about B movies as my focus really until I found out that there was a new video store opening up down the street from me. It was called Family Video, and I had never heard of that chain. And I went in there one day, and I noticed that they had all these movies that I had never heard of. Movies that, like, Blockbuster didn't have. Stuff from, like, Lionsgate. All these, like, Steven Seagal and Dolph Lundgren movies that I had not seen at, like, Walmart. And I went in there, and I'm just, like, going through the aisles, looking at what they have, and in that moment, I realized right then and there, this is it. This is what I can do. I can write about all of these movies that are here that I've never heard of, that most people probably have never heard of. I can review them, find out what's good, what's bad, what is worth seeing, what to avoid, and that's basically how that started. And I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, and as you mentioned in your book too, that was like a kind of a heyday. It was a perfect time to start it, because I was like, at that time there was just so many like straight to video, like B movie action kind of fare. But I just loved that column because, I loved writing for 411. I thought it was really fun. I still appreciate that site, but the movie section of it kind of when I was there felt like maybe a little bit of an afterthought to some visitors and just in general, because it started as a pro wrestling site and then kind of spun off into other divisions. But the one thing about the gratuitous B movie column is, there was no other movie site that was doing something like that every week, where every week you were going into so much detail about the most recent, like, Mark Dacascos movie or Don the Dragon Wilson movie. And so that's why, like, I thought of you immediately when we decided to do this new theme of ours. And not the movies we're going to be looking at are straight to video, which they're not. We are looking at theatrical releases, although how big those theatrical releases are, we will discuss, and ultimately I think we'll get more into the straight to video side of canon as we go through these 2 months. But at least for this first one, just to kind of set the scene and talk about canon in general, I don't know. I have an assumption, and we probably did like a top 5 canon movies at some point. I don't even remember, but I just have an assumption that canon is probably very special to you as it is to me, and so I thought you'd be the perfect guest for this.
Yes, that's true. Canon is terrific. I mean, I wish they were still around.
So
Yeah,
Chris, look,
I'm a little like, as we're gonna go through this month, but especially in this episode, I'm gonna feel like a little bit of the odd man out. If I'm
yeah,
being
that's what I was just about to ask, right? Like maybe
yeah.
like one of the. I mean, we'll obviously get into the history of canon here in a 2nd, but I think maybe a great way to just kind of even start that conversation is just to ask, because like you're a little younger, as you like to point out, but also just like I am curious, like, because I know you know some canon films. We've covered some canon films previously on the show. We've never just dedicated it to them like we are now. But yeah, what's like your kind of general, like, how aware were you of canon before we started doing canon movies on this podcast, or like what were you like aware of in terms of their reputation or what they kind of brought to cinema in the 80s?
My, like, I guess most of my knowledge of the studio is through Red Letter Media. Like, I have to kind of just give them props. I am a huge fan, as I know you are too, of their Best of the Worst YouTube series. So I have seen a lot of these movies, not a lot of them in their entirety, but I have been aware of them. Like, I know that they are kind of, I don't want to say micro budget, because they're not micro budget, but they're, they're bought at a discount, they're made at a little bit of a lesser price, and they're heavily sold to be something that they may not be. But a lot of B-movie action, B-movie, horror, sci-fi. I was thinking they're kind of like, is this safe to say that they are like the maybe B-movie equivalent to like, B-movie action equivalent to like Roger Corman? Like, is that an okay comp?
I would say they would probably tell you, especially Golden Globus, and we'll get into like the eras here. I think they'd probably bristle at that.
Sure.
I think they would.
Well, that's the reason why I say that, because I understand that these movies are more competently put together, right? Like,
Well,
and they did well. Yeah, hold on. I guess I guess they both have their kind of pros and cons, and in their historical relevancy to
I'd
film.
say what is similar to them and Roger Corman, especially the Roger Corman of this era. Like, and when by the 80s, he also had some clout to his name, and had his own kind of like, production companies and things, and companies that were going like a little bit more heavily. But I'd say like the similarity is the idea of low risk aiming for higher reward. So
Totally.
keeping your budgets low, right? Pre-selling your movies on a title or a poster, and then making the movie once you've sold it to enough markets to get the budget.
Right.
But making sure your budgets are low so that whatever profit you make is probably, fairly decent to just keep making to roll right into the next production. So a similar production model, I would just say, because you said like you called them like the action version of Corman. I mean, Corman obviously made action movies too, but I think the important thing to remember about canon is that the movies we're going to look at for these 2 months are obviously all action movies, because those are kind of the fun ones, and those are the ones I think people like look back on fondly as, a certain kind of film fan looks back on fondly as the action and sci-fi. But the thing about canon is they really were making everything, and Golan and Globus were huge film fans who were, they were making these because they were the ones they felt they could turn the profit on, but they themselves were huge like cinephiles who were into the films of Franco Zeffirelli and, Jean-Luc Godard, and would even work with some of those directors. And reach out and try to make very classy stuff as well, which didn't always go great for them. But so they weren't just an action company. It's just that their action movies are the ones that kind of tended to, when I was growing up, their action movies were just on cable all the time. They were video store mainstays. Like I said, they would get these kind of smaller theatrical releases, but then they would really just be all over the video shelves. And then I felt like and I'm sure Bryan remembers this as well, you couldn't come home from school or spend a Saturday night with your friends and turn on any movie channel without coming across a canon movie at any time. They were just constantly on.
Yes, that's true. I mean, they were on. They were on HBO, Cinemax. I saw a lot of them on the movie channel, but they were also on like basic cable stations like TBS, U.S.A, the old super stations like WPIX. I mean, I saw a lot of canon stuff on there Saturday. A lot of times it was like Saturday afternoon. I mean, there was always like a Chuck Norris canon movie or a Charles Bronson canon movie or something like that on, or King Solomon's Mines with Richard Chamberlain that was on all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm aware of, especially them buying, the rights to Death Wish and making a bunch of those sequels. Like, I am aware of those. And then, I mean, I guess one day we'll visit the the Eli Roth remake, which I'm sure both of you have lots to say about. But yeah, my experience and knowledge with the studio is very it's from afar. Like, I'm just going to be honest with that. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on their films. I've seen very little of them from start to finish. So this actually series is fun for me that we're going to be doing over the next 2 months, and especially today, honestly. I feel like I'm going to get a real education. So, I always got to look to my elders. So it makes sense, right? Right, Trev?
Well, I would say, going back just briefly, just for a second, when you said that it was sort of like a Roger Corman type thing. Sure. I think the best way to compare them and to maybe understand them is that Roger Corman is an American who made movies for the American audience. I mean, he played internationally, but it was made for the American audience. Cannon, under like Golan Globus, they were Israelis who were basically foreigners who had a foreign sensibility, trying to make American movies when they bought Cannon, and that's really the difference. I think that's how people remember them, because Cannon movies are often seen as kind of weird. If you've ever seen the documentary Electric Boogaloo, the first part of that documentary talks about how Golan and Globus, when they basically came into the American market, they made a bunch of movies that didn't quite play the way other B movies played, mostly because they loved American movies, and they tried to make American movies, but they made American movies from sort of like an Israeli sensibility. Mm-hmm. And that's why, overall, and I think this is true to a degree, that's why why Cannon movies tend to be quote-unquote weird compared to other B movies that came out of studios from Corman, from Charles Band, and all of the small video companies that sprung up in the 80s.
Right. It's also true that Corman's whole modus operandi was also too to really foster talent, and we have it's a very famous and well known thing about Roger Corman that a lot of really talented and the future power players of Hollywood came out of the Corman system, and he even had a thing where he'd say if you direct more than 2 movies for me, something has gone wrong. You've failed, right? His idea is he only wants you to make a couple movies, then go off and find greater success. And I wouldn't say that was true of Golan Globus. If they found a director who was willing to put up with their nonsense and work cheap and work fast, they would just use that director on multiple projects. And so it wasn't the same kind of they weren't even aiming the same way in terms of what they thought in terms of what they were giving back to Hollywood in terms of other filmmakers. They were just aiming. I mean, they were huge movie fans, but they were primarily aiming for quick profits.
Yes.
But we mentioned them buying it. We should. I know, Chris, you want to talk a little bit about just the general history of Cannon. Maybe we should just get that out of the way before we talk about, because I think we keep saying Golan and Globus, and those who don't know what we're even talking about, when most movie fans talk about Cannon, they're really talking primarily about one particular era of Cannon, the second era, which is when those two guys bought it. But did you want to talk a little bit about what Cannon actually started as first, just to get it out of the way, briefly?
Yeah, it's real quick. It was founded in 1967, and the first era, the Friedland and Dewey era, Dennis Friedland and Chris Dewey, they started the company in 1967, and their tenure lasted till 1979 before selling off everything to the 2 Israeli cousins, Golan and Globus. But they got their start with this company producing English language versions of Swedish softcore porn. Their budgets were tight. Well, maybe their films were too. But no, is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, but the budget were tight to $300,000 per picture, maybe even less. But they just had a lot of unsuccessful films, which led to them having to kind of sell the company off. So it started from that.
Yeah.
Golden Globe has had a similar sensibility in the sense that make things for cheap, but I think what we're going to be getting at is this era, the second era of this company, is really what took off, and really why, even film critics like Roger Ebert had said, no other production organization in the world today, certainly not any of the 7 major Hollywood ones, has taken more chances with serious marginal films than Canon. So like acclaimed, but in their lane,
Yeah, and we should say, so we're talking about 2 Israeli cousins, Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus. So they, as Bryan said, they're these 2 Israeli cousins who grew up in Israel and were just obsessed with movies. They would go to see, American movies and just other international movies whenever they could. And so, they grow up, they become successful businessmen, and then they want to buy a film company. And Canon just happens to be for sale, and they buy it. And by all accounts, and I would definitely heavily recommend that documentary that Bryan just mentioned, Electric Boogaloo. I actually own it on DVD and rewatched it the other night, which Chris, of course, made fun of me for because he thinks it's so funny that I do homework for the show. But
whoa! We both do homework, but it is funny that I don't know how familiar you are, Bryan, with many of our episodes. But if we do like one movie and it had like 7 sequels that were in the past, Trev will be like, "Well, I've cleared my whole schedule. I'll watch them all before," and I'll be like, "Well, I have things to do." So
yeah, I have nothing to do.
Well, there's nothing wrong with doing homework.
No, of course.
With that.
Yeah, for sure.
But by all accounts, Menachem Golan was the kind of like the creative lead of the company, whereas Yoram Globus was more the business guy, right? The guy who kind of made the deals and was the wheeler dealer. But Menachem Golan was like a huge movie fan. I mean, he directed a few of the Canon films himself. He definitely had kind of, I think in his mind, he really had an idea to be like one of the greats. I think he saw himself as probably a better director than he actually was, or at least what he was aiming for. He had very high aspirations, and like I said, I think he was really into really strong, real cinephile stuff as well. But they saw where the money was to be made at this point. And this was, as we just said, it's the 80s, right? So video stores have just started to take off. They're booming. And as we said, we mentioned there were movies being on HBO, Showtime all the time. The cable movie channels were still relatively new. And they were just hurting for product too, right? Because they didn't want to air, old black and white stuff from the 30s and 40s necessarily. And some of that stuff hadn't even survived into prints that could be shown on TV. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of programming holes that had to be filled. And that's where Canon saw an opportunity, right? Because you can only buy so many big budget, studio films from them. So you need to fill up those the top 2 shelves of the video store might be all the Paramount and Universal and Warner Brothers, but there's some shelves closer to the floor, and they need some video boxes too. And HBO needs something to put on at 2 a.m. So Canon was there to fill that gap. And because of that, and because they were willing to keep their budgets low, and because they had to make so much product, they were just willing to take these kind of wild leaps in terms of the movies they would make, the storytelling they would make, the approaches they would take, the actors they would put in the lead roles, and they just churned out during their era, which ran from 79 to about the late 80s, 87, 88. They churned out a lot of product, and a lot of which went on to be cult favorites. So.
I couldn't believe that in 1986 alone they hit their apex. 43 films in 1 year. That is insane.
That's more than all the studios today put together get out in a year, Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane.
Bryan, this is because since you and I have a little bit more history with them, I think before we start talking about the man of the hour in this episode, if we're just going to kind of start trying to wrap up this idea of Canon, obviously there are other people out there like us who are just obsessed with Canon, and and it's a big part of their childhood. It's very nostalgic. But I want to put this question to you, and then I'll try to tackle it too, or feed off your answer. But let's say Chris came to you a couple days ago and just asked, let's say Chris is even dumber than he is, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Which is very dumb.
No, but let's say what is a Canon movie, right? Not the technicalities, not the fact that they're produced by Golden Globus, but how would you describe what makes a Canon movie different than other movies of the time, and what makes it special, and why do you think it's held on and still those movies still have fans today?
Well, I think the first thing is that it's a genre movie.
Yeah.
It's either it's an action movie, which is that's what they're most known for, but they did horror stuff, they did science fiction, so it's going to be some kind of genre movie. They also tried to make their own genres, like the breakdancing movies. Mm. They did Break-In and Break-In 2 Electric Boogaloo, 2 huge hits. They sort of invented that idea. So it's a genre thing. The second is that it probably has a star in it that you recognize, but is probably not as prominent as like what we would call an A-list star. Charles Bronson, Chuck Norris, Richard Chamberlain. Brooke Shields made a movie for them at one point. Sharon Stone was in a couple movies. So something like that. And they also, a third thing is that they took a chance on making something that maybe no other studio would try. Like Tobe Hooper. He did 3 movies with them. After Poltergeist and the controversy surrounding that movie, you think about Tobe Hooper, his 2 big movies in his career, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. He did a whole bunch of stuff after Poltergeist, but were any of them as prominent as Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist?
Right.
Probably the closest thing is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is sort of beloved, but it's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Invaders from Mars is not a great movie, but it's still interesting, and Life Force is batshit insane. So those are probably the top 3 things. It's a genre movie. They have a star of some kind in it, and they took a chance.
Yeah, I agree with all those. I think actually, Chris, you kind of actually nailed it earlier, almost by like happenstance when you're saying, I think one thing you said about them already, I think to me is what kind of I would also add on is defining a canon movie, where you mentioned, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but you said something about how you were talking something about like the movie's kind of aiming higher than they actually had the resources for.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing I would say is like when you watch a canon movie, like I remember even as a kid, like at that point where I wasn't as heavily invested in cinema as I am today, right? And I would watch a lot of movies, but I wasn't yet tracking like directors. I didn't have favorite directors yet. I wasn't like, reading all the behind the scenes stuff. But even at that point, even at a young age, I'd see that Canon logo and watch the movies, and you would just know, right? You'd know like, well, this is fun. I'm liking this. This is not quite the same as the big budget, like Stallone or Schwarzenegger action movie I just saw. Like there was, it always had that kind of feeling where you could tell the budgets were lower, but that they were using every resource possible to try and emulate the bigger budget stuff. And that would obviously lead to what, a lot of people just say is like kind of campy, corny fun. But when you're a young kid, maybe you just kind of take it all in and you accept it all, somewhat similar. But you could tell. And I think that's still true today. And I think that's one of the things that kind of people like to look back on is the fact that they did aim so high in terms of like their ideas, the kinds of movies they're trying to make, even though they never quite had the resources for them. Like I'm trying to think, what is the most technically impressive movie Canon made? I guess it's Runaway Train, but after that, like, is there another one that you would say even comes close to feeling like a big Hollywood movie? I don't know. I don't know. Like, Brian, do you have any, like, what, like, am I crazy?
No, I think you can. No, I think the closest thing that comes to something like that, oddly enough, is Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone, and that's mostly because Sylvester Stallone is in it.
Yeah,
and it feels like a bigger movie.
It does, but then it's also one of the most mocked Sylvester Stallone movies.
Yes, but that because he's in it, Robert Loggia is in it. It just feels like a bigger deal compared to other movies, and truthfully too, maybe the Delta Force, maybe can consider that something like that on the low end, mostly because not to get off topic and etc., but I consider the Delta Force, which was made by Golan. That's almost like their version of a 1970s disaster movie. Chuck Norris is in it, but it's like an ensemble piece because he's in it. Lee Marvin, Robert Forster, Martin Balsam, Shirley Winters, George Kennedy, Steve James. So it has, Bo Svensson's in it. So it has this. It has a pedigree to it that is not. It's not Death Wish 2. I mean, Delta Force, again, I mean, a lot of people probably consider that movie silly. I know James Brunner, the screenwriter for that movie. I mean, you can find any interview that he's done, like, loses his shit about the second half of that movie. Because it's Chuck Norris and motorcycles that shoot missiles and stuff. But like maybe like the first part of that movie, it's very it's a serious. It almost becomes a serious drama.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it's an elevated movie. I don't necessarily use that language, but I mean it. To me, at least, when you look at all of the canon movies that are sort of like in that vein, the Delta Force is probably. It has a different. It feels like it has a different pedigree to it.
Yeah.
Whether or not they actually succeeded in, unless I don't know, maybe Golan didn't achieve exactly what he wanted with it, but it feels different.
Well, that won't be the last time that we talk about. Who knows? Maybe it'll come up in this episode. Disgruntled screenwriters, in terms of canon, we're not quite happy with how the final project turns out. Because that's another thing. I think that's probably becoming clear in our discussion here. But this is a company that, they hired screenwriters to, work quick, work cheap, write lots of product for them. As we said, they would find reliable directors to make the movies for them. But this was a company really primarily driven by like the creative, impetus of Menachem Golan. And so you kind of always felt like even when you were watching a movie that was like written and directed by someone else, you're ultimately seeing what he wanted on screen, and I think that's like a really important thing too. There's a moment in Electric Boogaloo where someone compares them to, what Miramax was later. And I think, there's some obvious similarities there. The idea of like, the Weinsteins also kind of taking the movies away from the filmmakers and doing their own cuts and things like that. Canon was also known for that. And like I said, who knows? Maybe they'll be relevant as we talk about Invasion USA. So Chris, do you want to start talking about like the man at the center of Invasion USA? Like,
at first, I guess we should probably introduce the movie that we're going to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do that, and I think we'll jump. Bryan, you're kind of perfectly segueing this thing with your Chuck Norris talk and your James Brunner talk because. Of course, they are involved in this movie. So let's just say that, again, we're looking at Invasion USA from 1985, directed by Joseph Zito. He made my favorite, and I think a lot of people's favorites, Friday the 13th movie, The Final Chapter. Written by James Brunner, frequent collaborator with the studio, but then also Chuck Norris. He wrote An Eye for an Eye, Missing in Action, and The Delta Force, as we were just talking about. Chuck Norris also helped with the script. Famed action star Chuck Norris and his brother, Aaron Norris, famed Chuck Norris's younger brother. That's his claim to fame, I would say. But the budget of Invasion USA, $12 million. It actually got bumped up. It gained an extra $2 million because Golan was delighted with the footage halfway through, so he gave him more money. Opening weekend, $6.89 million. Worldwide, $17.5 million. So not a huge moneymaker, but as we were saying before, they like to sell off things to international markets, this and that. Chuck Norris was also...
don't forget too with Canon, that whole like 2.5 multiplier thing, that's not the case because it's not like they weren't sinking that much money into like advertising on these, Like,
no, good
so
point.
If you spent $12 million and made 17.5, they're probably pretty happy with that.
Yeah. No, that was a good point. Chuck Norris himself was paid $2 million for this, so he actually got a pretty nice check. And this was the first of a 6-film contract with Canon Films. So, let's talk a little bit about Chuck Norris. I'll throw it to you, Bryan. You're the guest. Chuck Norris, the man, the myth, the legend, the beard, the Chuck Norris, Walker Texas Ranger lever from Conan. What is your relationship with the man?
Well, I've been a fan of his since I was a kid. I grew up with Chuck Norris movies on TV and the Chuck Norris Karate Commandos cartoon. I had action figures. I had a toy gun from that. Chuck Norris was always cool, I guess is the best way to explain it. You're a young American male in the 80s. He's like a living act. He's like a real life action figure in a way.
Totally.
He knows
That's a great way.
karate.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, he's also a real deal martial artist, a world champion. So he has like a credibility that someone who isn't a martial artist, wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And oddly enough, I think that is important to understanding how not only Chuck Norris but other action stars who are sort of his contemporaries. I mean, that's how they became famous. That's how they became movie stars, and that's how they became pop culture icons, because they were real. I mean, they may not have been a great actor, but they
You
were
don't
perform-
say.
But I mean, they were a good, maybe even great performer in
yeah.
the movies that they made. They understood. Both they understood and the people making the movies understood how best to use them, like Chuck Norris. I mean, before he really started working for Canon, he was always billed as the martial arts superstar Chuck Norris up until about 1982. 1983, he does Lone Wolf McQuade with Steve Carver, who he did An Eye for an Eye with Steve Carver. But he does Lone Wolf McQuade in 1983. That's the first most important Chuck Norris movie, because that helps bridge the gap between martial arts superstar Chuck Norris and action star Chuck Norris. Action star Chuck Norris isn't a karate guy. He's a guy who knows karate, and there is an actual difference there, believe it or not, because the guy who knows karate isn't always going to use karate to defeat the bad guy. He's going to use guns. He's going to use stunts. He's going to use something else. Like before, for instance, Eye for an Eye. I mean, that's just, you think about that movie. That movie's just about him kicking the crap out of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to Lone Wolf, you get to Lone Wolf McQuade. He's a cowboy. That's the first movie with the beard that creates the persona. Then he does Missing in Action and Missing in Action 2, which is its own thing. But he does Missing in Action. That is a much more serious action movie. He doesn't really use a lot of karate in that. He's building a persona, which then leads to 1985, which is when Invasion USA comes out. But 1985 is probably the most important year in his career, because that's Missing in Action 2, the beginning. That's Code of Silence, which is probably his best performance as an actor. That's not a canon movie, but that and then Invasion USA, which is the most Chuck Norris movie ever made.
I don't think you had to clarify that his best performance was not in one of his canon movies. I think that's...
Well, it's weird with Chuck Norris. It's weird with Chuck Norris again, because, like I said before, he's never been an actor. He's a performer. He can act, but I mean, you're not going to put him in a romantic comedy. He's not going to do Shakespeare.
Right.
But as he progresses in his movies, you can see that he when he started with Breaker, he's very stiff. You can tell that he's very stiff, and he's not necessarily comfortable yet. But as you get to, again, you get up to Lone Wolf McQuade, you get to Missing in Action 2, the beginning, Invasion USA. You can tell that he's getting better at what he's doing. Again, he's not going to be getting an Academy Award anytime soon, but he's he's doing a better job. And then when he gets to something like, well, again, I want to just seg back quickly to like Code of Silence. He made that movie with Andrew Davis, who also did Above the Law with Steven Seagal, and that's often considered one of Big Steve's best movies. There's a reason for that, because Andrew Davis knows what the hell he's doing. Mm-hmm. And I would say, too, to a certain extent, Joe Zito knows what he's doing with Chuck in both Invasion USA and Missing in Action.
Well, I think that point you made is really good too about him like the difference between karate guy and guy who knows karate, because it's really important. If we're going to talk about this movie, it's really important to acknowledge the canon era of Chuck Norris, because that is kind of a demarcation point for him, and it's one that he was kind of trying to drive very much himself. So canon was at a point where they decided they needed to sign some kind of big stars, some known stars. So it's the same period they go out and get, as Chris alluded to, they go out and get Charles Bronson and say, hey, let's make some Death Wish sequels, but they also get Chuck Norris. But Chuck Norris's whole thing is he signs this 6-picture deal with canon, but his point of view is, I don't just want to be the karate guy anymore. I want to be a more fully rounded action star. And it's pretty clear, I think, from the outside why that would be, right? Is that if you think about the mid-'80s, what's happening? What is becoming in vogue? It's the films of Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Yeah. He sees the writing on the wall. Just being the white karate guy is not going to be special. And actually, I don't know if he couldn't have foreseen this coming the same way, but it was actually probably such a brilliant move, because he transitions over to being also the gun guy, right? Also the more fully rounded action star at just before Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme really break onto the market, which would have made him feel even less special, because he would just be like another white karate guy, And yes. So it was kind of it was the perfect timing for him to segue into well, no, actually I can do it all, right? I can do those, but I can also do the lower budget kind of Stallone Schwarzenegger emulation films. And yeah, it is interesting that, we've already taken kind of a couple pot shots at his acting, and it is true that he doesn't have a Copland under his belt. He doesn't have a JCVD under his belt, and he also never some people might say Schwarzenegger doesn't really have that either, but a lot of people will acknowledge that Schwarzenegger found this incredible comedic timing as he went along, and actually it was oh no, you can actually put him in a comedy, and it's he's really funny, it's genuine, and Chuck Norris tried some comedies and that didn't work. So he never quite was able to raise to the same levels as some of these other stars, but he just never went away, did he? He was just so consistent. And then he gets to the point where he does find his thing on TV. Walker Texas Ranger runs, I don't know, a gajillion seasons or something, right?
Yeah, almost 200 episodes.
Yeah. And he becomes such an icon that I think we all remember that period where just there was you couldn't get away from the Chuck Norris jokes for a while, right? He was it was one of just the biggest pop culture things in the world was all when Chuck Norris was born, he drove his mom home from the hospital, behind Chuck Norris's beard is just another fist, all these jokes about him. He was just such a pop culture icon, even though I don't think you'll find anyone who would say he's as good of an actor as the other stars or kind of ever had the breakout kind of mainstream success in the same way. But everyone knows Chuck Norris. Everyone, totally. So it's, yeah.
Now, I think the closest thing that you could consider to a breakout performance is Code of Silence.
Yeah.
I think people in general would consider that his best acting performance in anything, and then maybe Hero and the Terror, because that's a little different kind of movie. That's the second Chuck Norris horror movie. So yeah, the closest thing is Code of Silence, but Code of Silence wasn't a huge hit, so that sort of gets lost in that discussion. Yeah. I think Code of Silence is a movie that people discover and realize that if he could have continued to make movies like that if he had wanted to. If that movie had been a huge success, he probably would have done that. And maybe Above the Law wouldn't have had Steven Seagal in it. It would have been a second Andy Davis Chuck Norris movie.
Chris, what about you? What is Chuck Norris? Does Chuck Norris mean anything to you? Have you seen any of his movies? Because it's like I said, I obviously know who he is. Everybody knows who he is. I'm sure you popped for his cameo in Dodgeball like everyone else did. But what about his actual filmography?
My history is through the TV show. So through Walker, Texas Ranger, I mean, at that point, when it starts in 1993, I'm 5 years old. So I used to actually watch that show with my grandparents. My Nana, I mean, she's still around. She loves Chuck Norris, like big time heartthrob in her eyes. You know, like the tight denim pants, the big beard, you know, always wearing jeans of some kind, you know. So she's a big fan of him. So I would watch that show quite regularly when I visited my grandparents. So really my knowledge of his filmography is lower, but him as the, you know, pop culture icon, he's a star, but not in the traditional sense. But like you said, everybody knows Chuck Norris. Purely through memes even. So that's honestly my familiarity, but also knowing that yes, he's never been known for his acting cred, kind of like Seagal though, so you can't really knock him, right? Like there's a lot of these 80s action stars that their performances, well, like you said, Brian, their performance is what you're coming for, their acting ability is maybe on the back burner, you know? So, yeah, that's kind of my history with him, but never actually my 80s action guy. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Like, we talked about this when we did Street Fighter, with, Jean-Claude Van Damme, who's recently, tried to fight Jake Paul, by the way. I don't know if you saw it, but
And God, I hope it happens.
yeah, he wants to have it anywhere in the world at any time. He was like, in the video, he's like, I will give 15% to anything that it goes to, and 15% charity. You pick charity, I pick charity, if that's what you want to do. So he wants to fight Jake Paul. Street Fighter, we talked about how Jean-Claude was never really my guy. And I would say Chuck Norris falls into that category as well. I am firmly in the Arnold Stallone camp. I think that's a lot to do with my father too. Like my dad's a big, you know, of course, like, you know, Predator and Rocky and all that other stuff. But I was more into the big Hollywood 80s action stars. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of where I am. Chuck Norris has never really been my guy.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think, you know, what we're kind of alluding to is like no huge mainstream hits except for Walker, I suppose, but his name did become synonymous for just a certain kind of like a brand of masculinity, right?
Yes,
like that, which is,
time.
that's still pretty cool, you know, and like look back and say like, well, just my name is used as like, you know, a meme about masculinity and about like what it means to be an action star, even if he never, you know, is that worth it? Like you never become the same level of action star, but your name kind of becomes like shorthand for action star still. That's still pretty cool, right? And it's still, he has his place in action history, clearly.
Totally.
It's a maybe it can best be described as a persona that only that you can try to emulate, but there's only one. There's only one Chuck Norris. There can only be one Chuck Norris. You can try to become your own Chuck Norris, but you can't be Chuck Norris. And I think the one thing about, and this sounds so weird saying it like this, and I know how weird it sounds when I say it, but Chuck Norris is one of those performers that has an integrity that people are drawn to. I think that's one of the big reasons why he managed to have a career as long as he did, and eventually why, when he did go to television with Walker, Texas Ranger, which was not an A-list show in any way whatsoever, but he was still able to be himself. He was able to project that persona and that integrity, and that's why he was so successful, and to a degree that's why he still endures.
Yeah.
At least in the pop culture sense.
And even his, like, just his all-Americana, right? Like, even compared to an Arnold or a Stallone, Chuck Norris is almost like a cliche in the right sense of it. You know what I mean? Yeah, like if you put up a poster of Chuck Norris in his tight denim look that I've been talking about, it with a mullet and his big beard and holding two Uzis like he does in this poster for Invasion USA, you're like, oh yeah, that's an American.
Well, I mean, he also did have his own gene line, the action
Yeah.
genes. So
Action genes.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
No, I think integrity is like a great way to put it because yeah, he also like if you go through his filmography, it's not like he never tried to make like a Junior or a Jingle All the Way, right? He,
No.
he didn't he had like I said he did some comedies, he had like Top Dog and Sidekicks and stuff, but he never tried to do anything super wacky, and then he also never tried to make like a big dramatic play. He wasn't interested in the same kind of level of drama that Stallone was, so he very much knew what his lane was, and he was smart enough to stay in that lane throughout his entire career. But I think that that integrity, that persona that Bryan is talking about is like because he was able to just tap into that every single time. I'm just sure he had this like dedicated fan base that was like, yeah, man, the new Chuck Norris is out there. I gotta check it out because I'm sure he's gonna kick someone in the face and I'm gonna love it.
definitely.
It's funny. He got the idea for this movie, Invasion USA, from an article in Reader's Digest. That said hundreds of terrorists were running around loose in the States, and speaking of all American ideals right now, like he was ahead of his. That's how U.S. policy is being made right now. I just threw a.
That's accurate.
Yeah. But he was really behind this movie. Of course, like he had a hand in writing it. He is on record saying they're trying to make a statement here, which is kind of funny watching the movie. So. Yeah, it's I don't know. Do you want to? There's not a lot of backstory other than what we've talked about. Do you want to just get into the movie proper here, and maybe
I think we should. Whatever relevant backstory we need, we can just kind of bring up as we talk about the movie.
Yeah,
let's. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it on the other side of this.
Can I put the star up this year?
Time for dinner.
No one thought it could ever happen here. They are an army of international terrorists.
America has not been invaded by a foreign enemy in nearly 200 years.
Their target, America. Their objective, control.
18 hours from now, America will be a different place.
Now, only one thing stands in their way.
It's time to die.
Didn't work, huh? Now it will.
They wanted a war.
See you in hell.
He gave them one.
Send me a postcard.
Chuck Norris. Invasion USA.
Soviet operative Mikhail Rostov. By the way, the third movie in a row starring a character named Mikhail, by the way. Trev, I don't know if you clocked that, but he leads a terrorist army to launch a massive, chaotic invasion of the United States. Retired CIA agent Matt Hunter once had Rostov dead to rights long ago, but instead decided to spare his life. Haunted by his near-death experience with Hunter, Rostov seeks revenge, forcing Hunter to end his retirement and act as a one-man army to foil the countrywide terror plot.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised you were able to take a movie as complex as Invasion USA and boil it down to such a succinct plot description. But that is in fact the plot of Invasion USA, a movie inspired by Reader's Digest. They should have put that on the poster.
Yeah, totally.
Bryan, you are our guest, our honored guest. So I'd like to hear from you first. Like, what is just your overall thoughts on Invasion USA? First of all, you can let us know like how many times you've seen it, if you can count that. But just like, what did this movie mean to you in the past? What does it mean to you now? And then what's just your overall take on it?
Well, I love it, for one thing. As a matter of fact, I watched it today before this podcast.
Wow. Doing the work, right?
As I said before, it's in terms of the Chuck Norris career, the Chuck Norris persona, it's definitely the most Chuck Norris movie ever made. It's also his second most. It's also, I think, his second most important movie ever made again. Lone Wolf McQuade is first, and then Invasion USA. They showcase Chuck Norris in the most Chuck Norris way, is the best way to put it. Because without those two movies, there is no Walker Texas Ranger later. In terms of what Cannon typically made at that time, Invasion USA is a gigantic movie. It's incredibly violent in a good way. It's also incredibly grim. The bad guys, Richard Lynch, who plays Rostov, is one of the nastiest villains of the 80s. Richard Lynch's performance is demonic. I mean, there's absolutely no redeeming value at all with him. He is you want to see him get killed. It's basically the best way to put it. In terms of movie villains, he is the worst of the worst. As soon as you see him at the beginning of the movie when he starts shooting at the Cuban refugees in the boat, I mean, my God, you think, Jesus Christ, this guy's a piece of shit.
You start asking, is he in charge of U.S. policy? It's the same thing. We have a through line here.
It's that Invasion USA. I mean, it's just, again, it's a huge movie. It's incredibly violent. It's grim. It's also a bit of a cartoon. I think it has to be that way because it's so grim, because it's nasty in a way. This particular movie and this story could probably only be done by Chuck Norris in the way it was done by Joe Zito. Because if someone else tried to do it, it would probably just be too overwhelming and just wrong. I think is the best way to put it. It fits in a very particular time period, 1985. It's the height of Reagan. Mm-hmm. The right wing is ascendant in a big way because this movie comes out a year after Reagan's 49 state win. So there's all of that with it. The movie endures because I think the movie endures because of Norris, because of Lynch, because of Zito's great direction. But again, it's incredibly violent and it's all real. There's no CGI. There's no miniatures. All the stunts are real. Chuck Norris is doing almost all of them himself. It looks incredibly dangerous when you watch it as a movie. You think about how it was made and stuff. It looks incredibly dangerous, and that somehow makes it exciting, or at least elements of it exciting. And two, you can't go wrong with Chuck Norris wearing denim with dually Uzis. You just can't. That is an iconic image. It's great.
All right.
There's no other way. There's no other way to say it. There's no way around it. As absurd as it is and may seem, it's still cool as fuck.
All right, well, Chris, I'm curious because this is I want to go to you next because this is exciting to the dichotomy here because this was your first full Chuck Norris movie then, right? So and you say you don't have familiarity, you don't have the same familiarity with Cannon and this these kind of action movies, but what'd you think?
So I'm gonna echo a lot, but I might have a fairly large disagreement. So we'll see. Might actually be more interesting than initially thought. But I think the direction of this is great. The action is great. I have some qualms, which I'll get to. But yes, I wrote down everything looks so dangerous. There's a moment where a police garage door explodes right at the camera. And I paused my movie and I actually recorded the scene and I sent it to Trev, not knowing that the stuntman involved in that actually sued Cannon Films because of that, because he was injured. I thought I watched somebody die.
Yeah, it's insane. It's so funny that you sent me that video clip because me and my wife had watched the movie earlier that day, and like that scene, like when that happened, we just both looked at each other on the couch like, holy shit.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking, but not just that. Like so many things just seem like unprotected. It seems like the people jumping between cars looks unprotected. Like even just the amount of guns and blanks going off, as we know from certain things in the past, sometimes that doesn't go that well. So there's a lot of guns being fired off willy-nilly, and even the proximity to the explosions is really close. And, you're saying that Chuck Norris did most of his own stunts too. You could tell. They don't really hide him either, so you can definitely tell that he's hanging on to that car going through that mall. So that stuff I just thought was great. And I love, the Everglades and airboats. That's a winning combination. So, like, stuff like that I just love. I thought this movie would have been like, I expected it to be a lot cheaper, look a lot cheaper and less competent than it actually is. So I was actually quite surprised and elated by how awesome a lot of it was, especially Richard Lynch. Like Richard Lynch as Rostov is the star in this movie, in my opinion. Like he's the one with actual character. I like that he's scared of Chuck Norris's character. I like that he's haunted by him. And I totally agree, Brian. He is. I wrote here, this might be like the most evil bad guy I've ever seen. He's introduced pushing a lady's head into her Coke straw, right into her fucking head, and then shooting a guy in the dick, and then throwing her out a window. I was like, oh my god. So I totally agree there. Now, here is my disagreement. I set out Chuck Norris isn't my guy. And I guess the preamble discussion we had might color it more favorably after we're done recording here. But Chuck Norris to me was just like so boring in a lot of ways. And he's got like this cold, blank, lifeless stare the whole movie. And I just found him kind of a charisma vacuum. And maybe that's because I come from pure Stallone, Arnold, John McClane type of action movies that are just kind of like, that's in my DNA now. So it's hard for me to kind of get around that. But I just found like Chuck Norris was like sometimes barely trying. and I think we'll get into details, but it was very evident to me, especially in the action, quote unquote, climax in a certain office building. But like I said, I'll mostly agree that this is like a pretty schlocky, great B-movie fun time. I can totally understand why it's held on. But yeah, Chuck Norris just isn't really my guy in a lot of ways. So I hope I didn't offend anybody, but Trev, I'll throw it to you now.
Oh my God! What if you you better hope you didn't offend Chuck Norris. That's the only one you got to worry about.
Yeah, he's outside.
It's dig your own grave at this point, buddy.
It's time for me.
But you know what? Go ahead and dig two graves, because I'm gonna echo primarily you, Chris, in that. Yeah, so I was keeping my mouth shut during our entire Chuck Norris discussion. If you noticed that I never really shared my thoughts, and that's because I didn't want to spoil them, and I wasn't sure. And I knew already that Bryan loves Chuck Norris, and I'm not looking to pick a fight or anything. But
I was about to say, did you invite him to corner him?
No. No, I'm very much with you in that Chuck Norris has never been my guy either, and I think his performance in this is very like evocative of why, like right as you just said. Like he just doesn't have that same charisma that the action stars I tend to gravitate towards have. And I think that has always held me back from, I mean, heck, my favorite like on-screen Chuck Norris, thing is probably his like very first movie where he fights Bruce Lee in Way of the Dragon. It's just the villain, right? It's like, I mean, obviously it's a great fight, and he just seems like so captivating and scary in that moment. And then there are some Chuck Norris movies I like where he's the star, but yeah, I do think he is kind of a charisma vacuum a little bit and just not super compelling as an actor, unfortunately. Now, okay, let's get that out of the way. Do I still absolutely like love this movie and have a great time watching it? Of course, right? There's no more like 80s action movie than Invasion U.S.A. And like there is a really good movie of this same era about the same idea, right? Red Dawn, which is like a much better movie, and it's just interesting that like they both came out around the same time. This, this notion of like, as you said, the height of Reaganism, the height of like kind of this like the return of red-blooded conservatism, and all these like power fantasies of American men who just want to almost be invaded so we can just like murder foreigners, right, left and right, and like Red Dawn is trying to be very more like, trying to tell a real story and have real characters in it, and this movie's not very interested in that. And we'll talk about the original cut and what they were originally aiming for and what happened with the movie, but in its final form it is just nothing but a sequences of events, right? Action scene to action scene. And Brian, you said how it endures for these reasons. I think that's one of the main reasons it endures is that you can turn this movie on at any time and just get sucked into it because there's no like plot to worry about. As long as you understand the central concept that a bunch of terrorists have come ashore in Florida and then spread across the entire U.S., which we're never really shown. We're just told about, but we just see kind of like the Florida aspect of it. And this is one man, of course, this one denim-clad man who can stop them. That's all you need to know, and you can kind of come in at any point, and you don't have anything to catch up on. You just get to watch the next moment of awesome practical action, real explosions, scary stunts, and just fun cartoonish action. So yeah, I think obviously on some levels, right, you could say it's a bad movie, but it's impossible to have a bad time watching Invasion USA. I think it's like so. I said this to my wife while I was watching it. This is the kind of movie where if you took this exact same movie, this same script, you got like a performer like Chuck Norris, and you made this movie today and put it out in theaters, and it's just not changed nothing, right? People would think it was like an over-the-top parody of 80s action movies because everything in this movie just feels that way. But that's what's great about it, is because it's actually completely earnest and completely real. It's not trying to be a parody. This is just what we were looking for in 85, and Chuck Norris and Joe Zito and Cannon were here to give it to us. And God bless them, because it's a blast.
Yes, I agree with. If you have ever seen that clip of John Carpenter talking to a British journalist back when he made Halloween, Carpenter is asked about his contemporaries, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, etc. And Carpenter, in his remarks and answering the interviewer's questions, talks about how sometimes a movie may be very flawed, but it's told with a great deal of authority by the director. The director is clearly in control of it, and that's what appeals to. And Carpenter talks about how that appeals to him, probably more than anything else. And in the case of something like Invasion USA, I think that applies here, because even if the movie is, again, it's a cartoon and it's silly in a way, it's told with a great deal of authority by Joe Zito and to a degree Chuck Norris, even though he's not the director, but it's part of it. So I think that kind of thing applies to this. That's another reason why it endures. It's because it's very sure of itself and it's earnest, and it takes it maybe it doesn't take itself wholly seriously. It's not a parody, but it's it's not trying to do something different than what it is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. Like, no, it's the people that are making the movie are filled with confidence, and you can tell. It knows exactly what it is and what it's trying to do, and that's something that I think I've talked to Trev a lot, because I look to Roger Ebert. I think we all do in a lot of ways. He's a legend, but I adopt his 4-star system, and we've had our debates, Trev. But the 4-star system is he talks about how 4 stars doesn't necessarily mean that you're an absolute masterpiece, perfection, objectively perfect movie, but you accomplish what you set out to do. And I think a movie like this, I'm not going to give it 4 stars, but I think it does accomplish a lot of what it's going for. And like I said, when I said the stunts are really dangerous, and it's dangerous, but it doesn't seem like it's getting out of hand. You know what I mean? Like, the camera is exactly where it needs to be to shoot it well. You know, the performers are doing exactly what they need to do it well. Other than Chuck Norris, you know, in the mall, going behind a piece of plastic to evade multiple gunshots. But I think the movie knows what it is, and it's doing it very well. And that's why when I said I expected this, because I'm not a Canon guy, you know, I expected it to look cheap. I expected it to be less competent. But this is a movie that is filled with competency. Like, really, like, the crew knows what they're doing. And the performers especially, like, we said Richard Lynch, like, he is giving it his all in this, and he's a great bad guy. Yeah, kind of echoing what you're saying.
I think that's great. I think it's like a great point to use, like, you know, the Roger Ebert scale to like talk about like what really works about this movie. Let's see what Roger Ebert said about this movie. Oh, he gave it 0.5 stars and called it a brain-damaged idiotic thriller, not even bad enough to be laughable. Oh, well. Okay, so we don't necessarily agree with him on this one.
Sure, no, of course not. But
I will admit though too, because so like obviously Chris and I are going to be a little harsher on the Chuck Norris element of it, but I don't even want to be that harsh about it because
no.
You know, like I said, he's not our guy. Like, this movie is kind of like shows why, right? I'm not typically interested in like that kind of like stoicism to the point of like where it almost feels like they're not trying. Like, that's kind of the vibe I sometimes get from Chuck Norris. But because his character is such like a sieve in this movie, and kind of like, I don't know, it does oddly work for this film, right? Because since this film does just become like a bunch of like sequences, and because the villain is so much more compelling anyways and over the top, like there's no like big personality to kind of like overwhelm everything else. So Chuck Norris is, you know, we called him an action figure earlier, and by the way, I do have a memory that I had the Chuck Norris Karate Commando action figure when I was a kid too, which is very funny to think now that I don't even, like I said, I'm not a huge Chuck Norris fan, but like, this is kind of like a movie where you're just watching an action figure in the lead, right? Mm-hmm. He's just this like he's a piece that's moved from scene to scene to just shoot guns, coldly deliver one-liners, murder bad guys, and that's it. And like for what this movie is and what this movie becomes, which is just kind of, you know, you said like near parody level, over the top, extreme right-wing fantasy action movie. His like lack of emotion and like lack of charisma oddly works. I don't know. It's strange.
Well, that's kind of what Bryan said earlier when you were saying this is kind of a perfect Chuck Norris performance, or like perfect like use of him.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're getting at, right? Like, he is just moved around to these terrorist killing vignettes. You know, he's got his terrorist radar on, and he just shows up on the highway to go to the school bus. I had heard. I'm going to steal this from one of the guys at Red Letter Media who I really like, Rich Evans, but he called Hunter's character, or I guess Hunter here, he's the Bugs Bunny of action heroes. And I'm so glad that, Bryan, you had said this is a cartoon, and I really did feel that watching this as well. Yeah, so that kind of goes hand in hand.
Well, I think one of the reasons I especially call it a cartoon, beyond Chuck Norris, beyond Richard Lynch, is that when the terrorists arrive on the beach in the World War II boats, it's a smattering of like every cliche terrorist bad guy. I mean, you have the Chinese guy, you have the Arab guy, you have the Eastern European guy, you have you may have the Western European socialist guy. I think that's the Western European socialist guy is probably the guy with the glasses who puts the bomb in the mall. When you see him at the hotel resort at one point, and he's wearing the Speedo. In the 80s, that's how all those Western European guys were depicted. There were guys wearing Speedos like that. But I mean, again, when all of those terrorists run on the beach, I mean, again, there's the Arab guy, there's the Chinese guy, there's the, you know, every so-called enemy of America from the 80s is there, is in that, you know, is in that, I don't know what you want to call it, that blob of people. So, I mean, but when you look at that, you know, again, even though the story is grim, when you see that, there's an absurdity to it that makes it easier to take, I guess.
Well, no, totally. Like, it's even like this takes place over Christmas, and our villain rocket launches an entire family dwelling neighborhood during the holidays, right after introducing you to the children that are arguing over putting the star on the top of the tree. Like, in lesser hands, going back to that like competency thing, or even confidence in what they're shooting, going in lesser hands, that is so incredibly disturbing and scary and evil and gross. And not to really connect how much is going on in the world now, but a scene like that is almost like impossible to do right now. You know what I mean?
Well,
and somehow this works.
We have to remember that, like, by quite some time, right? This is obviously a pre 9/11 movie. And
yeah.
For a long time, America. I mean, I still remember a large swath of my life where we were just kind of naive to terrorism, right? And lived in this like this like what's the word I'm looking for? I guess naive is a good word for it. Right?
No,
we didn't think we were going to ever get hit. Like,
yeah, you were invincible.
Yeah, not to that level, right? Like, that terrorism is something that happens everywhere else, right? So that's why this movie seemed like such a fantasy. But we still knew we were the world's police, right? And even just like that idea of having a cartoonish coalition of every kind of international villain. Well, that's because we know the kind of audience that this movie is being sold to unironically, right? There's obviously an ironic audience for this movie, which I think we would fall into to a degree. But there's obviously also meant to be an unironic audience for this movie, and you don't want to like undercut any potential fantasy they might have about any kind of foreigner they want to kill, right? So just give them all of them, right? Like, we don't only want to, have to kill Russians. We also want to kill Arabs, and we want to kill the Chinese. Like, they're all our enemies, right? So this movie's like, wise enough to say, well, we'll just give that audience what they want to see, and like that adds to the corny cartoon element to it. But there's also like a subset of people that probably really thought like, yeah, this is what U.S.A. is all about. They come here, we will take them out. And I don't know, it sure seems like we might see that mindset still very much alive today. So the movie is speaking to something that does exist. This is like, I think, Chris, maybe we've had this conversation before. I don't think Bryan and I ever had, unless it came up in some kind of column we did together or something. But like, I think all of us, the strange thing about like Bryan and I, especially like this movie and these movies of the 80s, is that there's something so bizarre about the fact that I'm about as like progressive and liberal as it comes. And yet I just love all these right-wing action movies of the 80s, and I think that again speaks to, I guess it's important for them to be so cartoony and to where you can kind of view them as parody if you want to, and others can view them as like a little bit more serious. And I think this movie does a nice job towing that line. I guess maybe there's audiences who take this very like uncynically, but it's just stupid enough where I can just kind of laugh at it and be like, oh yeah, this is clearly a right-wing fantasy, but it's just so ridiculous. I can still vibe with it.
And I think it works for that because I think Chuck Norris is the one to take this seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like his statement saying that we are trying to make a statement of American people. I don't know, maybe he wasn't in on the joke as much as everybody else, and maybe that's why the performance is what it is, and that's why that great mixture of taking it seriously, but then everybody else is like, what is Chuck doing? And then like this incredible mixture is kind of, that's why it plays so well for this crowd of us three. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like offending us.
It's interesting because I know they this is another movie, as we alluded to before, too, that was originally meant to be like deeper and have more character stuff in it. And by all accounts, especially as you said, Menachem Golan was like really impressed with the early footage he was seeing. Reached out to Joe Zito and said, like, I'm giving you $2 million more. Just add more action, right? Give us more action. And ultimately, the film they cut is just action, right? It's just action scene after action scene. But I do think there was originally an inkling of there being something deeper here, and I'd be very interested to see what that looked like, I suppose. I don't think it would probably be as effective or fun, clearly, right? This is a case where the studio butchering was probably correct in just making this kind of movie that very much works. But that's where I wonder about, like, when you say, like, you know, Chuck Norris, how seriously he took it. I wonder were there originally scenes where he did try to act more, or scenes that call for him to act more, and if those scenes were probably wisely cut because he couldn't like muster it up, you know, like maybe it was smart to just cut him down to just the action stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's like, I know there's like a special edition Blu-ray of this. I don't know if there's any deleted stuff that survived.
There isn't.
No,
Okay.
nothing.
I don't have that. I have the Shout Factory one. There's nothing on there. Vinegar Syndrome put out one, a 4K, that's more extensive, but I don't remember there being any deleted scenes or anything like that on there. But I something that Trevor was talking about, I think in terms of Chuck acting in this movie, the closest thing to that is the scene towards the end of the movie after he walks through the carnival that has been attacked. And he's very somber in that. And again, he doesn't have a lot of lines, but he does say, you know, I can't remember the exact line, but it's like, for every one I stop, 10 succeed.
Yeah.
So there likely was some sort of like deeper dramatic underpinning to it that clearly they cut it out.
Yeah, even that scene, I noticed that because like it's kind of like said more that what you're like when he's in the carnival, it's kind of alluded that there's like a lot of dead children laying around, but they don't like show us that really. It's not like the camera doesn't like linger on that, and I was like, I wonder if there was like a version of the movie that was kind of gonna try to be like more graphic with that. And I'll tell you, even like one bit of behind the scenes trivia that I found very interesting that to me hints at them trying to do something a little bit more interesting with this movie is the idea that Chuck Norris originally wanted the journalist in the movie, the one female character, he wanted her to be played by Whoopi Goldberg, which is like so interesting to me, right? And the fact, like, and Whoopi Goldberg actually wanted to do it, but Joe Zito didn't like her, so he overruled Chuck Norris and said no. It's such a nothing character as it is in the movie, right? Nothing. So there's just nothing there. But you wouldn't cast Whoopi Goldberg to be like that, for that character to just be that much of a nothing. So at least there, Chuck Norris obviously saw something more with that character, and I think if it was Whoopi Goldberg, there's probably more on the page, and there probably would tended to be something more on screen with her. So yeah, I'd be interested to see the original script or something, but I think I'm probably pretty happy with what we got, even if there is barely a female character in this now.
Well, I think Whoopi Goldberg would have been incredibly interesting because that would have been 1984, 85, 86 Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah.
And she had a completely different energy than she does in the 90s and even now. That would have been interesting. One thing that I think back about with something like Cannon is that why didn't they get Lucinda Dickey to be that?
Yeah.
To be the reporter.
It'd get an extra half star for me on that alone because I have a huge Lucinda Dickey crush. So
you do like Dickey?
I mean, it would have been. I mean, it would have fit in brilliantly. I'm assuming it's just because she didn't like working with Cannon after 3 movies.
3 movies in 1 year.
She didn't. Yeah, because she didn't go back to them. And I think she's only appeared in like 6 movies in her career. So. No, I think James Brenner has talked about how there was parts where the reporter helped explain more of the story to make it deeper, but they were cut out.
Yeah,
and it's probably because I think her name is Melissa Prophet. Has an interesting presence in the movie, but she's not. She's about as good as an actor as Chuck is.
Well, also,
and we don't like making fun of actors on this.
We don't like making fun of actors on the show, no. But also,
I don't want to sound like I'm making fun of her, but I think something like that character. I think again with something like Whoopi Goldberg or even Lucinda Dickey, who had a different vibe to her, they would have been better suited, I think, to because I think the reporter character was probably meant to be more emotion to provide more emotion to to the movie. And,
well, I think what they cut the movie down to, too, you just said, like, originally the character was supposed to explain more of the story, but, like, what they cut the movie down to, nothing needs to be explained. Like I said, I can't imagine anyone being like, boy, I'm really lost at this point. Like that's not something anyone's ever uttered while watching Invasion USA.
I would love to see whatever that stuff is. I would love to see why. I would love to see for myself why they cut it out.
Yeah,
I have a big guess as to why they did, but it's still something you want to see. At least I do.
Could just be time too. The movie is an hour 47, I believe. And
yes.
That's just already I don't want to say it's long in the tooth.
It is pushing it. Yeah.
But it's pushing it. Like a movie like this, you want maybe a tight 90, like even 100, but it's pushing it. So if this was maybe the first cut or close to release cut was, crossing the 2-hour mark, I don't think it would be nearly as effective. In my opinion.
I'll tell you one scene they could have cut that I'm so glad they didn't, and I know Bryan will come along with me on this one, is that that scene you mentioned earlier, one of the first Richard Lynch scenes where he, murders the one with the Coke straw and shoots the guy in the balls. That's not just any guy shoots in the balls. It's the great Billy Drago, and for even just a couple minutes to have two of the most fascinating faces of like 80s cinema, just like the most striking looking, like bad guy actors in Richard Lynch and Billy Drago, both on screen together. Every time I watch this movie, I'm always like so excited to see Billy Drago, and then remember like, oh yeah, they kill him immediately, and that's too bad because he's like billed in the opening credits, and I think I always trick myself into thinking, oh, he's got to be like the second in command bad guy, right? And like, no, he gets shot in the nuts and gets dispatched. But still really cool to see Richard Lynch and Billy Drago, because if this movie had been made just like 4 years later, Billy Drago probably would have played the Richard Lynch part, So it's really cool to see the two of them together in that moment.
Well, Billy Drago, of course, was the bad guy in Delta Force 2, The Colombian Connection, or Operation Strangle, or what it has a second name. I can't remember what it is. I think it's Operation Strangle.
This is why I love Bryan, because Bryan will say something like, well, of course Billy Drago played the bad guy in Delta Force 2, and like just unironically say that. This is
Hey, Bryan, I want to ask you this, because this didn't technically get a sequel. Our next episode is Avenging Force, so I don't really want to talk about that really at all. But I know, of course, this was meant to show more adventures of Chuck Norris's character here, Matt Hunter. But then for reasons it didn't happen. Take your knowledge of Avenging Force out of play here. Do your best. And starring Chuck Norris, going into more sequels of this character, you've seen it so many times, and you're obviously such a fan. It's like, where did you want to see this franchise go with CIA agent Matt Hunter? Especially without the, spoilers for anybody watching, but, Rostov gets blown the fuck up. In a spectacular fashion, by the way. I did say that is the best of all the one-liners of the movie. That's Chuck Norris's best, by just saying it's time. Love that. But they really do explode him. You see it.
And can we also can we also just quickly say before you continue this point,
sure.
like again, I've mentioned this before on the show, but one of my favorite things is when a movie just knows when the fuck to end and get out. And like, this movie is a great example of that. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the greatest Laws rocket scenes ever filmed.
Yeah,
I'll put it that way.
So again, take the knowledge of Avenging Force out. Where did you want to see this character go if the crux of his mission of this movie of revenge and of Rostov being alive, where did you want to see this franchise go, if anywhere?
Well, oddly enough, I think if Chuck wanted to do it, and if they could have figured out how to do it, they probably could have had Matt Hunter be kind of like a James Bond type character. That's probably the closest analogy I can come up with, where you have Matt Hunter maybe in whatever the Invasion U.S.A. sequel would have been. Maybe he would, because in Invasion U.S.A. he sort of comes out of retirement from the CIA. So maybe in the sequel he's working with them again, or he has some sort of like a arm's length relationship with them, and they can call him in when something's happening. And maybe in the sequel, there's some other terrorist organization or something like that that's going to attack America, and he has to stop them. Something simple like that, but like a James Bond. Like I said, they could have done like a James Bond kind of thing with it, where where like in James Bond, there's always a new adventure for James Bond. They could have had multiple Matt Hunter adventures.
I guess I wonder if they could have done, like, of course they want to keep the Americana stuff going, but I wonder if they could have done, like, invasion, Australia or whatever. And
that's my guess, right?
Yeah,
I think like
they call Matt Hunter in to be like, hey, you dealt with it, because then you can keep the vignette thing going. You can keep the now he's riding a kangaroo to go kill to foil the plot at this shopping mall in Sydney or something. Like I wonder if they could have done that invasion, Australia, invasion
That
Denmark,
seems like such the obvious answer, right? You've already made Invasion
yeah.
USA, and like to just do Invasion USA 2 and say like, oh well,
happening
America
again.
enjoyed peace for like a year and then more terrorists attacked. That seems like almost too simplistic.
Right.
But like, if you call the next one Invasion Russia, and then you say like, Rostov had a brother and he's planning another attack in Russia, so Hunter, you have to go there first, and like now it's about Hunter invading Russia. Like I think you could do like a whole series: Invasion Russia, Invasion Cuba,
invasion Greenland.
Yeah. Invasion Canada, 51st state.
Well, time to go.
No, that's actually a great idea. I think that could have worked if they had figured out how to do it. They would have probably had to make it all in South Africa or something.
I think the funny thing about that question, though, is just, and Chris, you probably know this as you ask it, it's just that the problem with that question really is the fact that Matt Hunter is not a character, as we said. Like, and I said, like, it's not necessarily ruining this movie, but Matt Hunter is an idea. He's just a
action figure.
He's an opportunity for Chuck Norris to just be action man, right? And like and this is probably a byproduct of like them cutting things and changing what we were just talking about. There's the moment where he talks about how this wouldn't be happening if you had just let me kill Rostov when I first had the chance. And then we go to that flashback, which it's structured so weird that I didn't realize it's a flashback. Like, you think it's happening now, but it turns out to be Rostov having a nightmare of like their first encounter. It's just like, it's so oddly edited, but like, it doesn't even quite match up to what he said, because he says something where he's like, if only you had like let me kill him. But then we see that like he had him dead to rights and just decided not to kill him himself. So it doesn't quite match up. But I'm there probably had to be something more there about why he didn't shoot him there, and like they were like, nah, that's story. Get the story out of here, But by taking that story out, there's nothing even in his backstory that makes Matt Hunter that interesting. So I think it's weird to say what would you want to do with the sequels, because you can kind of take this character and plop him into any action movie and say it's a sequel to it. There's nothing on a psychological or character level that needs to be continued. So I think that's the tricky thing.
Maybe it's a more interesting question, Bryan. We ask ourselves at the end of the discussions, do we want sequels? And seeing that this movie has stood the test of time in a lot of ways, and has become a cult classic. Like you said, it's Vinegar Syndrome did a print of it. Shout did one, so it's highly acclaimed in our film cult like circles. Would you want sequels, or is this kind of like, because it's a one? Not to, I'm not trying to push you in a direction, but because it was a one and done, is that why it's stayed in our minds, in your mind?
Probably. I mean, I think that's probably part of it. I think. See, me personally, I think if you have something that is successful and people like, you should keep making it. You should keep making more of it until people get sick of it. I'm a firm believer in running franchises into the ground. But that's just me. I at the same time, I don't know. Like I said, could they have done something with like a James Bond thing where they put him in different adventures, or like you said, Invasion Australia or something? It may not be like a great idea to do a sequel, simply because I don't know if they could top it. I don't know if they could top Invasion USA the way it was made. I think if they ever did try to do it, the package of who was involved in it would have to be at least as good as Invasion USA. I mean, Joe Zito very good action director. Could he have figured out how to do it? Maybe.
Well, but Chuck Norris never wanted to work with him again. I know, Chris, you were getting to that earlier.
Well,
like
I think
after the Whoopi Goldberg thing, he was like, yeah, I never worked with him again.
Yes.
Like,
well, if you listen to the Joe Zito commentary track, at least on the Shout Factory Blu-ray, he makes it very clear at the beginning that he's not friendly with Chuck Norris anymore. He doesn't talk down. He doesn't talk him down. He doesn't call him a piece of garbage or anything like that.
Right.
But he tries to make it very clear that, they're not friends anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if they were going to ever try to do an actual sequel, the package of it, who's involved would have to be at least as good as what we saw in Invasion U.S.A. And I don't necessarily know if they could have done that again.
Yeah. Like even take out my and even Trev's, lesser thoughts on Chuck Norris for it. It does still feel like lightning in a bottle in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes when you have that like incredible action movie that works because of the sequences and because of the overall premise, and not so much the character at the center, it's best to just say, you know what, one and done, we got it. I'm like, by the same token, like, I don't think any of us are disappointed there weren't Commando sequels.
Totally.
Schwarzenegger had his fair share of franchises, and you could see why you'd want to make more Terminators and why you'd want to go on with other characters. But like Commando, like what more is there to say about that? Like it's just like, oh, that rules. He got his daughter back, and he murdered hundreds of people doing so. Great. Now I don't need to see him pulled into like another adventure, and that's kind of true here too, right? You put everything on the table on this one, right? Every terrorist in the world invaded the USA, and Chuck Norris killed them all. So it's like, let that be the ending. Like in the universe of Invasion USA, I'm happy to believe that the world has just enjoyed pure peace ever since, and the reason it has is because no one's even willing to be a terrorist anymore because they know Matt Hunter's still out there. So it's just like terrorism ended after this movie,
Yeah,
that could be the case.
Yeah.
But I agree with you with Commando too. I mean, what else would John Matrix do? There could be something for him to do. Would I have liked to have seen someone try to do a Commando 2? In a way, yes. I would like to see someone try that. But at the same time, I don't think they could do it.
I think my point is, like, if you're talking about Invasion USA or Commando, right? And there's other examples of this too, but because there's nothing to the character, any sequel you could make, you would just say like, well, you could also just rename that character and make it its own movie.
Yeah.
And obviously we'll kind of talk about that in our next episode, but like even just now it's worth saying that.
Yeah. I don't have any final thoughts on the movie. I think that's I've kind of wrapped up my thing. But Trev, I would throw it to you, and then we could throw it to Bryan, and then kind of put a stamp on Invasion USA. But I'll throw it your way, Trev.
I mean, my final thought is I think the ultimate, like, testament to this movie is that I'm not a Chuck Norris guy, and yet this is still a movie I've watched a lot in my life, and will probably watch many more times, Not always, as is the case with a lot of Cannon movies, not always from beginning to end. I would certainly come in this movie at different parts on cable and stuff over the years and just keep watching it, or just watch scenes on YouTube sometimes to, like, kind of, laugh or just enjoy. But I mean, if you like 80s action movies, if you like practical action and just the insanity of 80s action movies and the over-the-top excess, I mean, we didn't even mention the fact we talked about them blowing up that neighborhood, but how awesome is it that they just talk about taking advantage of, like, your actual, like, what you can get away with, is that's just a neighborhood that was actually going to be bulldozed to like build like an airport or something, and like Cannon just said, like, well, if you're gonna bulldoze it, can we just like blow up all the houses with rocket launchers and film it? Like, that rules. We never see stuff like that anymore. Yeah. So even if you're not a Chuck Norris guy, like I'm not, you still owe it to yourself to see Invasion USA at least once in your life. And I doubt it will be just once, because it's just like, it's high octane action from beginning to end. And it's so much fun. It's got a great cartoonish villain with a great performance from Richard Lynch. It's got incredible action sequences. It's a little long, but not too long. It's 80s cheese action perfection. It's great schlock.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think another element that we didn't talk about, and I don't know if people talk about it enough in terms of action cinema of the 80s, is that the score from Jay Chataway is a huge element as to why I think the movie endures. It has become such an iconic theme, at least to me. And the people at Cannon thought it was, because they used it they used that music in several different movies after this came out. At least in 2 Charles Bronson movies that I know. It's in Death Wish 4: The Crackdown. There's a part where suddenly the Invasion U.S.A. theme starts playing, and it's used at the beginning of Assassination. The music will, that opening theme, especially when Chuck is riding on the airboat shirtless.
Yeah.
That theme helps set the tone for what you're about to watch, and it's at least to me, it's a theme that you'll never forget.
Yeah. I'm glad we have a running gag. Well, not really a gag, but we talk a lot about score on this podcast, and we're called Score Whores, and we are legion. So, Bryan, thank you for being the score whore today. Thank you. But yeah, final thoughts on Invasion USA. Like, again, I don't know. Can you tell me how many times you've seen this?
I have no idea. It's got to be.
I love that.
A lot. It's a movie that I have watched since I first saw it on TV.
Wow.
It's a movie that I enjoy going back to every so often. And it's one of the most it's one of the most important Chuck Norris movies. It helped cement his persona. It's a pop culture artifact that I think will continue to endure into the future. To me at least, it's a great movie.
I know we're wrapping up, but can I just ask one quick question? Because I'm curious. Because we talk about how you keep saying how this is like the perfect Chuck Norris movie, and how it exists as like this perfect showcase of him. But do you think this movie would work if a different action star had been the lead? Right? Same script, but imagine Invasion USA with a Stallone or a Schwarzenegger or a Van Damme. Like, do you think this needs the Chuck Norris secret sauce, which is just that just like that kind of like stone-faced, almost charisma-less action figure like approach? Or do you think the charisma and personalities of the other action stars would have overwhelmed what the movie is?
I think if someone else did it, if Arnold or Stallone did it, it would end up being a very different movie. Stallone. He has a. He did Cobra. Cobra was produced by Golden Globus.
Yeah, we're doing Cobra in this series.
But it's probably close enough to it. But even then, Stallone is a different persona. I don't think. If he did something like Invasion USA, it would end up feeling like a completely different movie. Van Damme, no, I don't. He would have to. Unfortunately, with the way his accent was in the '80s,
yeah,
he couldn't. He'd have to be the bad guy.
Yeah,
with the way those movies were. But if they had tried to find a more seasoned actor, either a character actor or a star like Tom Selleck. I don't know why that name came to me, but someone like that who at least can emote. I don't think it would work.
That's pretty funny.
I don't think you could do this story, but it wouldn't be the same movie.
Yeah,
right.
This is what I'm saying. So I might have knocked his
Lightning in a
performance, but I think
bottle,
the movie
yes.
needs it. Yeah.
I agree. Because even like Stallone has similar sensibilities, in the sense of like, let's just say politics,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
So,
Missing in Action is kind of like the Missing Action series is like Chuck Norris's Rambo series essentially. So like they have their like parallels, but
it's funny you say it's basically his Rambo. It's because they kind of stole it,
Yeah. Well.
well, yeah. In the '80s, because it was like, Missing in Action is like 10 years or something after the end of the Vietnam War, and there were tons of movies that came out in the '80s that were about going to Vietnam to get the POWs.
Yeah.
And Chuck Norris beat Stallone to it. But, there was Uncommon Valor with Gene Hackman. There was, tons of other movies.
Yeah.
About that kind of thing.
That's important to remember about the genre at the time, and even just this movie, right? That's a great kind of thing to remember as we're wrapping up. Is like this was an America that was still feeling the sting of having lost a war for like the first time, right? And in kind of like spectacular, very public fashion. And then also just like the resurgence of a mindset of people saying like we're sick of feeling bad about being American, and like we're celebrating old school patriotism and conservatism, and like that's so indicative of like so many action movies at the time. And Invasion USA kind of is like maybe like, you know, it's not the best action movie of the 80s, but it might be the most representative of like a certain mindset that existed in the 80s hovering around the action genre. So not only is it a fun schlock movie, but I even think sociologically this is like a really important movie to kind of consider when looking at the action genre, and especially in the Reagan era, as Bryan said earlier.
Yeah, totally.
Well, Joe Zito talked about this a little bit on the Blu-ray commentary. He tries to, because he's interviewed throughout the commentary track, and he tries to make it clear that he saw Chuck Norris, the Matt Hunter character in the movie, as a cowboy. That's why the reporter constantly calls him cowboy. That's what the denim is about, and that's what the two Uzis are about. That's that's like the two 6-shooters. He's John Wayne in a way. And that also, if you want to talk about right-wing politics, I mean, John Wayne is the alpha male epitome of Americana still to this day, for reasons that make no sense to me, but whatever. But I mean that's that kind of motif that comes into that, like Trevor was talking about.
Well, Bryan, this was awesome. and honestly, like, and I really mean that. I'm not just here to float your boat. A boat that might get shot up by Rostov. But no, this was great. This was really informative, and I think it was just a great discussion. And you know what? When me and Trevor seem to be more on the same page this episode, but sometimes when we are not on the same page, we get combative, right, between me and him. And it's funny that you're such a calming presence here, okay?
Yeah.
even Trevor. Like, yeah, you're such a calming presence, and you're well spoken. You obviously know what the fuck you're talking about, and you even leveled off some of my critiques from my notes. I feel just more subdued, and I guess I am more forgiving of some of my negativity towards the movie, and I'm gonna walk away from this one feeling even better about what I watched. So no, this was cool. This was really good.
Well, I think one of Bryan's great strengths is he really does make you like calm down and just relax and be more appreciative about like B movie cinema, and that's always been true. And like and Bryan, like I want to give you one last chance here to like, obviously people can check out your column, the gratuitous B movie column at 411 Mania every week. But like, take one more chance here and plug your book. Tell us a little bit more about your book one more time here, because like obviously what I just said is your book is a celebration of that idea.
Well, the book is not coming to a theater near you. 50 great direct-to-video action flicks of the early 2000s. It's published by Bear Manor Media, and it's me talking about 50 great direct-to-video action flicks of the early 2000s. It was like that's the last great sort of video store era where that kind of movie was available, where it made money, and it's a cinematic period that isn't talked about enough. At least I don't think it is. Action movie cinema is still very much similar to horror cinema in terms of everyone's still talking about the 70s and the 80s, a little bit of the 90s, but no one has started talking about the early 2000s. I mean, that was over 20 years ago now, and those movies, the 50 movies that I'm talking about in the book, they're on every streaming service now. The free ones, the ones you pay for, they're all over the place. And I know, especially when you get to something like a Steven Seagal movie from the early 2000s, a lot of people didn't know that he was still making movies during the early 2000s. So one of the stated reasons that I decided to do the book the way it is that you may see those movies on those streaming services. but you may not want to watch them. You may not want to give them a chance because they may be awful. So you have my book. You can read my book, and I can tell you why you should watch Driven to Kill, why you should watch Submerged, why you should watch the Don Seagal movie, The Girl from the Naked Eye. There's a lot. There's a lot of movies out there, especially from the early 2000s, that if you weren't in the video store, you weren't perusing the aisles at Walmart in the home video section when there actually was a home video section, you don't know about these movies. So that's why I wrote the book.
I started reading it today, and I'm already loving it. I want to put you on the spot one last time, really briefly. I was going to ask you, like, to not to spoil a book, but to maybe just like recommend one movie from it. But actually, I'm going to slightly rephrase that now, and hopefully this isn't too much of a brain buster right now. But if you could just pick one like 2000s direct-to-video action movie that you would recommend to someone who's a fan of Invasion USA, or just like the canon kind of action movie, is there one that pops in your head to say like, yeah, do like a double feature of Invasion USA in this? Because I know my answer from your book, I think, because mine would probably be Command Performance, the Die Hard clone with Dolph Lundgren as like a rock drummer taking on terrorists in a concert hall.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe in terms of like insanity, maybe Shadow Fury, which is the first. I mean, that's not exactly it's not exactly the same kind of action movie, but it's insane. That movie's from 2001. Command Performance, definitely. And maybe Starship Troopers 3 Marauder.
Okay, yeah.
Or, well, heck, why not Universal Soldier Regeneration? That's a great Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren movie.
Okay, great.
All right, well, yeah, again, thanks, man. This was fun.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah. This was a lot of fun. It was great talking to you guys. It was great talking about Invasion USA and Canon Films.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, Brian, you will stick around as a listener and listen to the next couple episodes of this theme month's Misfired Cannons, because next episode we're looking at Avenging Force from 1986. And then we're looking at Cobra, actually, from 1986. Same year. I think that was the same year of 43 films, by the way.
Yes.
Produced by Tom. And then we'll be wrapping up Misfired Cannons with American Samurai from 1992, outside of the Golan Globus era. So, and you can do that at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2 F Pod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be great. And then just join the tribe and hit that subscribe, and come along with us. This canon theme is going to be cool. It's going to be different, fun.
And never forget, Chuck Norris is the only person that can divide by 0.